Hi, I'm John Groders. We talk to a lot of content creators on this podcast, but today we have someone from the exhibition side of the aisle. As it turns out, movie theaters aren't dead, but they are changing. Meet one of the change leaders, Eric Kuiper, today on No Shame.
Have no shame, no, we are not afraid, no shame of the gospel of his name. It's the power of God by which we all are saved. We need not be afraid, no shame.
So we've got in the studio today an actual theater guy, and we spend so much time talking to people that make the movies, but I think Eric Kuiper, welcome to No Shame Podcast.
Hey, thanks.
I think you're the first guy from the actual theater chain we've ever talked to, as if the theater hardly even matters to all of us filmmakers. But in fact, it's kind of very, very important. And you are the Chief Creative Officer at Studio C. Tell me what that means.
Well, it means that I oversee what we call the creative part of the company. So all of our programming, film programming at this point, we have a programming team in my department, and then as well as now, just in the last month, not even, we opened up our first music venue in downtown Grand Rapids. So the music programming as well lives within my department, as well as the marketing and branding and and all that jazz. So for us, that's the part of the company, Studio C, which most people within the West Michigan world would know the name Celebration Cinema. That's our theater chain. But then we just launched this massive development project in downtown Grand Rapids, which is now all the pieces are officially open as of a couple of weeks ago. And so we really expanded the business pretty significantly, rebranded to Studio C for that to kind of help the brand carry the weight of all these new ventures that we're into. But really, still the bread and butter core of the company is that we have 20. We've got 12 theater locations across Mid and West Michigan.
So that's a theater chain. Let's back up a little bit to say part of the movie business is theaters, obviously, and there are some big theater chains, and then there are small theater chains, and you are representing what in this area where we live is a very well-known theater chain started by Jack Lokes years ago, and at one time, the place called Studio 28 was at one time, I believe, the largest theater venue maybe in the world. Is that right?
Yeah. So Jack. When he founded the company, it was 75 years ago. He bought the Photo News Theater in downtown Grand Rapids. It was a one screen. They were showing newsreels. That's all the content they had. And he bought that after the war wrapped up. There went the Photo News, and so he was actually a part of what created the system that now exists. Where they were pushing back on the fact that it was studios owned all the theaters, and so he was a part of that push that created the situation we now live in, which is that that studios don't own the theaters; that's owned separately. So he was a part of that. Things moved to the suburbs. Drive-ins became a big deal. He got really involved into that. But then he did open Studio 28, which was the first multiplex in the world, and then continued to grow from there. And for many years was the largest movie theater in the world, which had 20 screens. And that was absolutely unheard of. Everything was a one, maybe a twin. And he was like, well, what if, there were a lot more movies being made at that time? And he said, what if we could show all of them? And so that was, Photo News was 75 years ago. Now interestingly, we just opened this new theater in downtown Grand Rapids, Celebration Cinema Studio Park. 75 years later, a few blocks away from, it was 123 Pearl Street. We just opened at 123 Ionia Avenue. So the family and the company has made this 75-year loop to land us back in downtown Grand Rapids.
Theaters have changed a lot, and it's also interesting that now if you look at Netflix, it's like the studios are owning the theaters again in terms of Netflix creates its own content, has its own network, everything. They are the big gorilla. But in contrast to Netflix, there still are places, of course, where we go sit down and watch a theater. Now, Studio 28, just to go back to that, I mean, of course I remember Studio 28. It was the happening event spot, you know, and I didn't realize all those years when I was going there that it was so unique. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
But one of the things I loved about Studio 28 was Theater One.
Yeah.
Tell me about Theater One.
Well, it sat 1,000 people.
Wow.
I mean, just to watch a movie with 1,000 people. I mean, yeah. I mean, I also growing up in Grand Rapids, I remember seeing Top Gun in there, and it was it was amazing. This gigantic screen. So yeah, I mean, that place has this very, very warm place in many of our hearts, to the extent that we actually, the old Studio 28 sign that was on the outside of the building, you might be able to picture it in your mind. The script studio, that part of the sign we had kept. And in a barn, and been sitting in a barn forever. It's installed downtown in Grand Rapids at Studio Park, and because there's actually a few bricks from Studio 28 that we put in the lobby down there, because it really is. It's a place where a ton of memories were made for people, but it was an old sloped floor. I mean, everything was sloped floor at the time. It wasn't stadium seating. That didn't really come along until the 90s. So it was a magical, gigantic movie house where you had this shared experience with 1,000 of your closest friends. And
the biggest films, you go to Studio 28 back in the day, and you probably have a movie in mind you want to go see, and you don't know which theater you're going to be assigned to, and they're all different sizes and shapes. Yep. But I used to go there and just say, I don't care what I'm seeing. I'm going to Theater One, and whatever they're showing, I want to sit in there, because it was an event. Massive screen. Massive. Yeah. Yeah, right. And I mean, this was before IMAX was a thing. And Celebration Cinema North, which is now on the Beltline in Grand Rapids, was also another pretty innovative part. John Loke, so Jack's son, was pretty instrumental in bringing IMAX to. So we were showing IMAX films there north before Marvel was making IMAX movies. We were doing the stuff that museums were doing, because there wasn't a place to see that in Grand Rapids. And then really Hollywood caught up and was like, wait a minute, look at this format. So, but back in the day when we were kids, there was no IMAX. There was no large format like that, unless you went to a place like Studio 28 and sat in this room that had a theater, a screen that you had to practically turn your head left and right to see the whole thing. And the sound was as good as it could be. And I mean, it changed over the years when Dolby came in and when THX came in. That was my reference theater, and I always wanted to make movies for that specific theater, but it's not going to happen anymore. We're not going to have 1,000 seats at the theater. So it's an interesting story. I think Studio 28 probably closed 10 years ago. What happened? It was at least that long ago. It was before I was with the company, so the exact timeline's a little foggier for me. But yeah, it was over 10 years ago. I mean, it was a number of things. Cinemark came into town and opened a couple of locations, one at the mall in Rivertown and then one at Woodland Mall, which we then later acquired. So that started to shift the market, as well as we opened, Celebration Cinema North, we opened Celebration Cinema South. So in some ways was starting to kind of cannibalize ourselves, I suppose, in that. But it was really just the trajectory of the way things were going. But when that was closed, Studio 28 was closed, there was actually, believe it or not, Studio 28 had a liquor license. We sold beer there, which was in many senses, way ahead of its time. And then really nobody was doing that. We held on to that liquor license and the zoning of that, because the intent was like, we figured that would probably come to downtown. And so part of closing that was the assumption that we would probably bring something downtown Grand Rapids, which isn't very far from where Studio 28 used to sit. So it was just knowing that things were evolving, the markets were evolving in Grand Rapids, and so it was a sad day. I mean, and there was a lot of it was a very hard decision. I know as the stories are told, and
And, most companies would never get the opportunity to have something so beloved that when it closes down, people actually weep, So, but it was the right thing to do in that time. And so it's now really exciting to see there's an interesting energy around us being downtown now in Grand Rapids, but, also just the opportunities with new formats and things like that.
So the theater experience, obviously, when you look at old photographs and you see these giant marquees, and the actors and actresses' names in huge letters, and it's, whatever, Gone with the Wind. And I mean, there's this nostalgia for when movies were rare and massive, and that giant marquee single theater. Jack Lokes, was part of the transition. He's part of the ones that moved us into the multiplexes. And now all of a sudden, you don't get the big marquee with the big star because the marquee has to show multiple titles. Titles have to get a little bit shorter in length. And you get to the multiplex stage. Well, I feel like we're in another rebirth right now, and I haven't seen what you're doing downtown with Studio C. I know where you are, but why don't you tell me what the latest trend in theater construction is and why you guys are making the decisions you're making?
Well, interestingly, a lot of it has to do with seating. And, we were talking about slope floor, and then it went to stadium seating. And, pretty much every movie place has stadium seating now. But now it's become recliners. And, it's interesting that because – and I think part of it is that content the content on the screen – For a long time, movie theaters had the corner on that market, right? And now it's not the case the way it used to be. So consumers, I think, are looking for an evolving experience. When they go to the movies, they want this big experience. And so, recliner seats, quite frankly, has been a huge part of a transition for when we're talking about the physical space of a movie theater. But again, I mean, our new place downtown is 100% 4K laser projection. I mean, if the film was shot in 4K, we're projecting in 4K, and it's stunning. It's absolutely stunning. We didn't put 3D in our theater downtown. We have it in all of our other locations, but it's only 9 screens, a little smaller because of the urban space. But that's a format that maybe has seen its day, not entirely. There's some films that have it, but I mean, again, you think back to like, watching Avatar, right? I mean, people thought movies were going to change forever. I mean, I remember watching Avatar in IMAX 3D and thinking, this is the only way anyone's ever going to want to watch a movie in the future. Well, it's not the case. I think that I don't know that storytellers really continued to use that as a way to tell the story. It just became something. It became a gimmick for a lot of filmmakers. Others are still using it in really cool and intriguing ways, but for the most part, that's not driving it. So we didn't put 3D downtown.
Jack Lokes being such a pioneer. Now, in the grand scheme of theater chains, yours is a small one, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Fairly small.
Yeah. Yeah. We would be, yes. In the grand scheme, like I said, we have 12 locations in 6 markets. So we are a family-owned, regional, kind of mid-sized chain. But a lot of the things we've done, we've kind of been punching out of our weight class. We're right now, as of just, I don't know when this will post, but as of just hours ago, we're introducing a movie subscription program. There's no theater chain of our size that's doing that. The big guys are doing that, but we're in the game as of now. So these we're not a huge theater circuit. We're family owned. We're local in that sense. I don't know if people in Mount Pleasant think of us as local with our headquarters in Grand Rapids, but we're a car ride away from every one of our screens.
But there's a lot of theater chains in your weight class around the country, and they're really important. You don't exist as a filmmaker if you want to do theatrical without making contact with places like like you guys, and
Yeah.
and it's not just the big AMC's or whatever. You've got a chance to have an experience. I'm remembering. I forgot I did this, but there was a time in my life where I used to do the voiceover work for your answering machines that listed all the movies. And I had a studio. This was a previous employment, but I was able to do this. In exchange, I got free movie pass. I saw so many films, all because, I did all that telephone work, which was easy.
Yeah.
I never saw more films than in that era of my life. That was at Studio 28.
Yeah.
Because there was a lot to talk about. If you were telling all the start, because you couldn't have the internet. This is pre-internet.
Right.
It might not even have been time with color. I can't remember. Maybe not even talkies. I don't know. It was a long time ago. But I'm kind of glad because, all right, I know you represent a theater chain, but I'm glad you're building because I've had the suspicion that the experience in the movie theaters itself may be diminishing and dying. Is that true? Is that not true? And you guys are building, so
Yeah. No, I mean, it's not true. From a box office standpoint, the last couple of years were the two biggest years the industry ever had. From an attendance standpoint, that's not as big as it once was. But again, that's where, as the company and the industry evolves, right? I mean, we do sell beer and wine in pretty much all of our locations, cocktails in many of them, increasingly full kitchens. So you're having dinner in the movie, and that's all a part of it, right? And that's something that our guests want, and that's great. And so there are, it is evolving in that sense, what that larger experience is. And on average, people go to the movies less than they once did. When you and I were kids going to Studio 28, that is different. That being said, there's still a tremendous number of people coming. I mean, we have millions of people come through our theaters every year. And so, it's going to continue to evolve. It's going to look a little different. But everybody thought movies were going to be dead when TV came out. And then everybody thought movies were going to be dead when Blockbuster opened up. And everybody thought movies were going to be dead when Netflix started. And that isn't the case. And certainly, these streaming the streaming platforms, which are like multiplying like rabbits right now, are shifting things. But we don't really look at Netflix as our competitor. In the sense that ultimately you've made the decision to stay home if you're watching Netflix, and that's a very different experience. Really, our competitors are really everything else you can do when you leave the house, and so that's how we look at it. We're in the experience business, and there are few things better than sharing the experience of a story with one person sitting next to you or a room full of people. And so, I still think, there's a great Seinfeld Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee episode from this more recent season where he's talking with this comedian and he goes, is there anything better than the moment when you say, let's go to the movies? And he's just like, to what you were saying before, he's like, I don't even care what I see. Sometimes the movie's not even great, but it's always a happy moment when you're talking about, let's go to the movies. So my kids are more excited to go to the movies than ever before. They want to do that. I don't think that that's going anywhere. The business has to continue to evolve, but we're building because people want different experiences, and we're trying to provide those. But it's not going anywhere.
I'm glad to hear it. I mean, this is very encouraging. I'm speaking with Eric Kuiper. He's the Chief Creative Officer at Studio C, a theater chain. And you're talking about the shared experience. There's kind of an inherent promise, at least in my generation, of, like you said, hey, let's go to a movie tonight. It just sounds different than let's go bowling tonight or let's go walk the beach. Let's go to the movie tonight. There's a sort of a little promise. You mentioned comedy. Comedy is especially more fun in a crowded theater.
Yeah.
I think I read you say, comedy is a lot more fun in a crowded theater than Home Alone.
Yeah.
That's true, isn't it? It's the shared laughter that kind of makes it more fun.
It's scientifically proven. I mean, and it's even why I hadn't watched a show with a laugh track in a long time, and my kids were watching one, and it just really struck me but that's why laugh tracks existed in bad comedies for years, was that, especially if you're watching by yourself, it helps if somebody else is laughing, right? So yeah, you put that in real time and space with people, and comedies are funnier. And I mean, horror movies, which is a genre that is having, I don't know, renaissance is far too strong of a term, but many of the, you look at what it did, a couple years ago, and now coming back with a sequel this year. I mean, some of those films sort of have come really surprised and come out of nowhere. But that also, I think, has a lot to do with people love to be scared in public. It's fun to. I mean, if you're in a horror movie and there's a good jump scare, to watch 50, 80, 100 other people jump with you it's fun. And then I think that there's the other side of it too, where you think about a movie like A Quiet Place, is just remarkable to sit in a theater in utter silence in a movie where what's happening on the screen is begging for not a peep to be made, and the whole room follows suit. A colleague of mine was in a screening, and someone had an infant in the room, and the baby started to cry, and it was right during sort of a critical moment. And he said, I mean, it was just like people were panicking, because waiting for the monster to come out of the walls.
She was a plant.
Yeah.
That would be creative.
So, that stuff, there are all those elements to that communal experience, that it's different than, watching something, streaming. And again, it's not like I'm anti-streaming. I watch a ton of stuff at home. I'm in that, I love what streaming has done for some smaller titles that maybe just wouldn't have a life outside of theaters, or they'll come and go to theaters really quickly and people don't get a chance to see them. So I'm thrilled that it exists, but I still, most great films should be seen in a theater.
You are kind of creatively tasked to do interesting things to sort of move people to the theater for various. So you're being creative about it.
Yeah.
Like this $2 Founders Film Series. That's just one I wanted to ask you about. What are you doing?
Well, so when I first came to the company about 5 years ago, we had been doing a classic film series for a long time, and really it was sort of petering out. But really all we were doing was sort of, my understanding was kind of randomly picking cult classics and putting them on the screen and all that. And what I really wanted to do was take that idea and again, flesh it out, right? And especially when you get into classics, you're going to show Jaws or Good Will Hunting or Caddyshack or whatever. I mean, there's a million ways you can get to it. So you don't need us for the content; you need us for the experience. And so what we wanted to do was build the experience out around it. Let's revel in and celebrate our love of these movies. So what we thought was, how can we add interesting layers to the experience? So we went to Founders and said, what if we pick movies together and we match them thematically with your beers, and then we put the beer on tap inside the auditorium. So, and again, for us, we started this before we really, we had the ability to sell, but didn't have like built-in bars in some of our locations. And so it was, at that time, it was a real novelty. But that was it. It was sort of this as simple of idea of taking, let's take, show Dumb and Dumber and have Double Trouble on tap inside the auditorium, right? And we just had fun with the pairings, and people have really responded to it. And we also were like, we do it on a Wednesday night when it's not generally busy anyway. So it's alternative programming, which was my original role with the company. And say, how do we drive traffic to our theaters on a Wednesday night when it's otherwise quite dead? And so we were like, well, what if we more or less made the movie for free? Charge a couple bucks, covers the licensing fees that we pay, and see if we can sell some beer. And that's worked. It's worked really well. And interestingly enough, there'll be nights throughout different rounds of this classic film series that we're doing where that single showtime at 8 o'clock on a Wednesday night has more attendance to that one movie than all of the other movies in that building combined for that day. And sometimes it's 50% of the attendance on some random slow Wednesday night as people came out to watch, I don't know, some crazy comedy, or again, like horror movies, things like that. Those are the ones that people love to see, or really great classics like we did The Godfather early on. And the number of people who had seen the movie 50 times, but they were too young to have ever seen it in a theater. And so they finally got to see it on the big screen.
It's different on the big screen, isn't it? I mean, people have better TVs by and large. Some people have incredible surround sound systems, and no doubt you can create a home theater experience that's pretty good. But you're still home, and like you said earlier, it's still a different vibe if you're going out. You don't want to go out every night, but you don't want to stay home every night either. I mean, if you have the choice. So, what is it about? I mean, this is kind of obvious, but I'd like to hear you explain. What is it about a movie theater that you worked so hard to create that makes it a different experience than a nice home theater?
Well, obviously the technology is a part of it. The seats are a part of it. But, I still think the real magic in it is being away, like you're saying. It's stepping out of your space. I mean, you don't fold laundry while you're watching a movie at the theater, but you probably fold laundry while you're watching Netflix. And again, great. There's a lot of content that people are watching while they're making dinner on their iPad propped up in their kitchen counter again, and which is great. But when you go to the movies, to me, it's about stepping out of the spaces that are otherwise kind of calling for your attention. But it isn't. A lot of people talk about it as escape. You go to the movies to escape or to be entertained, and I don't think that that's a bad way of thinking about it. But I really think you're not escaping your life. You're actually finding enough quiet to allow your life to interact with a story, right? And maybe have that be the only thing that's going on. I go to Sundance I've gone pretty much every year since, the early 2000s. And it has turned into a pilgrimage for me. And part of that is what I experience about myself as I go from story to story to story, and everything else is shut out. Certainly there are plenty of people who are still messing around on their cell phones in our theaters as much as we ask them to stop. But the light is a distraction, the sound is a distraction. We want people to stop that. But to me, there's even just this greater invitation of going, just turn that off. And be present with this story and see what's there. Really the magic of movies for me is if you're willing to even go deeper into the experience. Now we're getting more philosophical, but of saying and say, stop asking the question, do I like this movie? And start asking the question, or allowing the question to be asked of you, does this movie like me? What does this movie have to say about me? As opposed to having your review tweet written before you walk out of the theater. It's great. And I love to do that stuff too. Let's talk about let's see what we have to say about movies. But what does a movie have to say about you? That's a powerful place to put yourself in.
I like to do discussion groups after these films, and I love to talk about a film. That's a big part of it to me. But the wrong question is, did you like it? Is it thumbs up or is it thumbs down, or how many stars? The better question to me always has been, well, what did you see? And if you have a group of people discussing a film and they start just recalling, well, there was this scene where, or I liked it when this, and you know what? You had not consciously remembered that scene, but it's in your brain. So it's almost like reliving this thing in a second time. And ironically, the films that if you were to say, well, what's your favorite films of all time? And it's almost universally the ones that I had discussion groups afterwards. Something sort of watered the seed because we talked about Schindler's List for 2 hours after the movie with a bunch of filmmakers. And so I'll never think that Schindler's List was just a movie. It was something so much deeper because those people gave us that experience. So yeah, did you like the movie? I don't even know when I'm watching a movie at what point I make that decision.
Yeah, right.
Sometimes I make a decision and then I stick to it.
Yeah, and there are a lot of movies that I think are amazing that I'm glad that I watched. That I mean, people be like, "Did you like that movie?" I'm like, did I like it? No, it was painful to watch, but that's why it was great. It was supposed to be. I mean, well, let's take, a popular Saving Private Ryan. Did you like that movie? Did you like the first 30 minutes of Saving Private Ryan?
I still have bullet holes in my chest.
Right. Like, I don't ever want to watch that 30 minutes of film again because it was so visceral. But I'm really glad that I had that experience. I have empathy and understanding in a way that was otherwise not available to me because that movie was made, and I'm thankful for that. So, there are scores of movies that would be on a list like that for me that I'm glad that I've seen that were painful to watch.
These kind of discussions are where were you when you heard this song? Saving Private Ryan. If you're of age, and I was with my band on a trip to Tennessee, we were doing we all went to the movie theater. It was completely packed, and we had nothing but the front row. And so the four of us were sitting in the front row, and I really do still have bullet holes from that. And when that thing opened up and they were shooting at me, intense experience. Yeah. Eric, you have this thing you called Into the Noise, and you go to Toronto, you go to South by Southwest, you go to Sundance. What are you doing, and who are you bringing, and why do you do that?
Yeah, so I referenced the fact that I the first time I went to Sundance was in 2005. I was taking a class. I was there for a class, and it just blew the doors off my world. I loved movies before that. I was very into that world before it, but there was something about sort of intentionally going into the space that I really liked. There were some other friends who had a similar experience in the year or so after that, and so we kind of organized ourselves. It was while I was working for Mars Hill at the time, a church in Granville. And we just said, let's just get organized about this. A friend of mine, a couple of these same friends, we had been writing. We started basically like a pop culture blog, I guess you would call it. It was rednow.com. You can go to that website. It's not the same thing anymore. But we were basically, instead of writing reviews, we were basically writing an invitation into the experience we thought that particular piece of pop culture, and a lot of it was films, had for you, whatever that might be. If we didn't like it, we didn't write about it. And so we were doing that, and I was just really interested in. There was sort of a community that was forming around the country, and I was just like, but I'm most interested in doing this in real time and space. I like the virtual thing is great. I like what it affords us, but I want to do this in the flesh and blood. So started to just organize and start taking people to Sundance, and then we played with it for a while, taking people to South by Southwest for music. That's a festival that, as a music festival, presents itself kind of like a film festival, and it's multiple venues and opportunities to see the same things multiple times. And so we were doing that. Was taking people to Toronto for a while, and really all we're doing is we're kind of curating the experience. It's sort of a little bit of tour guide and curation of the experience. If you want to go to Sundance, it's a very difficult place to navigate if you've never done it before. And I think a lot of people would be afraid that they would screw it up and do it wrong, which you might if you don't have a guide. And so that's really what we're trying to do. And so it's looked different years. So there have been a couple years where essentially a single entity has just said, hey, our company wants to do this retreat. Will you just do this for us? And this is what we want to do. And so we've done that. Some years it's sort of an open call. Like this year, it looks more like that. So there's people from LA and Chicago and Grand Rapids and a number of stops in between that will descend in Park City for 5-6 days. We take care of lining up the lodging. We take care of getting tickets, some baseline of tickets, and then we sort of teach you how to do it. And then we try and create some space for people to talk about the films. But it was always the idea of like a conference sort of experience without letting the conference get in the way. Like we don't program the time a ton outside of the movies because ultimately we really want people to go and experience the movies, but then have some places where we discuss those things like you're talking about. So yeah, that's what it is. It's myself and a couple friends trying to open the door to a space that's otherwise too intimidating to get into and have your life change potentially.
So, I mean, Sundance in Toronto, these are kind of the kings of the film festival. But film festivals are all over the place now.
Yeah.
And the film festival experience of going to movies is a little different than going to Studio C movies. There's a chance you will discover some artistic nugget that hits you right where you live and you never would have found it in the megaplex. And there's a chance you'll be sitting through the most boring thing you've ever endured and you just don't know why you spent money to come here.
Yeah.
But sometimes I would imagine that you, Eric, would say that there's some value in exposing yourself to these alternative films. And you talked about the Turin Horse at one time.
Oh,
I thought
yeah.
that was a fairly interesting example.
Yeah, well, right. So that was one of the first movies I ever saw at Toronto with a group of people. And I mean, if my guess is most people haven't seen it, but yeah, it's an hour and a half black and white film with almost no talking, where you basically watch these people give up hope on life. It was inspired by the quote where they talked about, when Nietzsche said God is dead. It was, at least the story around is that he had just watched this guy beat a horse to death or beat a horse, and it was sort of like this film director musing on what was up with that horse before that kind of situation. So you're just watching these people eat their last potatoes. I mean, it's just really, it's a slog. But the thing is that movie, the group of people that we went with there, and we saw, I mean, the funny thing is we probably saw a couple blockbusters that everyone loves, and I can't even remember what we saw. But we talked about Turin Horse. It came up in conversation all the time. And that's a great example where somebody said, "Did you like it?" Like, no, I didn't like it. I didn't like it at all. But it actually was really impactful to me. So I think that, the value of Paul Tillich, the theologian Paul Tillich said that revelation is that which disrupts, transforms, or heals. And I really like that idea of a film disrupting you, and just maybe it just disrupts you because it forces you to slow down to a pace that you otherwise never enter into. Turin Horse does that. Sometimes the disruption is a filmmaker bringing a camera into a space to expose something to you that you would otherwise never have a shot at seeing. The Devil Came on Horseback was a documentary I saw at Sundance that was in the early days of the Save Darfur stuff. I mean, it was actually the people that were behind that ultimately, but it started in many ways with this film. I didn't know what was going on with the Sudan, any of that. Like, I was really ignorant to a lot of that stuff when I went in, and I would have never known. I would have. That's the first time I walked out of a movie theater, and within 7 days was actually calling the White House. So that's. But those are the kinds of films that I think I get it on any average Friday night when you're just looking to unwind and cram some popcorn in your mouth and kind of forget about your woes. Yeah, you're not dialing those things up that often. But what I hope. And that's where I think festivals are great because you sort of get in a different mode. But those films, at least here locally, we work to bring some of the really good ones to the screen. And I do hope increasingly that people just once or twice a year just go be disrupted. Go have somebody tell you something that you don't want to hear, and see what it does. See how long it lingers with you. If a movie feels slow to you, is it because it was poorly made, or are you just living at a clip that is not sustainable? Who knows? That's what movies are to me.
I'm speaking with Eric Kuiper, and Chief Creative Officer at Studio C. But Eric, this is the No Shame podcast. In our discussions, we talk about our tagline, at the intersection of faith and culture. And so a lot of times, we're speaking with authors or actors or directors in faith and culture, and they've got something to say and they want to present it. But I think today we're looking at it from a little bit of a different perspective as an audience member. Now, your background, you worked with Young Life, which is a thing that I was big into as a kid. You've worked with Mars Hill. I went a couple of years, took my kids to Mars Hill. And you've got a theology degree. So you're actually a pretty good guy to talk about the intersection of faith and culture when it comes to movies.
Yeah.
So what do you do with people that say, man, I just don't know? I mean, we're just talking about exposing ourselves to things that stretch us, that we might disagree with, but is there also a side where movies can, harm us, create desensitivity in our minds, pull us away from healthy things?
Sure. How
do you balance that?
Yeah, I certainly think that it is about the posture in which you come into the room, or to the screen. So yeah, I don't think every film that's made is worth watching or needs to be seen or by any means. But what I think there has definitely been what feels like a when it comes to faith and film or faith in film, that conversation for far too long has been far too narrow. And again, there is a reality that people like to see themselves on the screen, and there is an entire market that is driven at putting. We can speak crassly about it, about affirming evangelical beliefs through movie characters, and that is a market, right? That is a profitable thing to do if it's done well, marketed well, all that stuff. That can lead to success at the box office. That doesn't mean that everybody who's making those films, that's the only thing they care about. They're passionate about those stories. But yeah, there was an awakening, I think, in sort of Hollywood and the edges of Hollywood of like, hey, this is actually a real demographic we should pay attention to. And sometimes it just gets pandered to, quite frankly. You see some of the stuff that comes out, it's very poorly made. But the other side of it is for me, the idea and what has always been inspiring to me is not about going in and having something I believe potentially reaffirmed and by some doctrinal statements being spoken by people on screen. That's not that interesting to me. What's interesting to me is getting a view into someone's life who's very different than mine and going, oh, like how much of my own belief structure is simply an indoctrination, right? Like, because I've been exposed only to what I've been exposed to. So I like to go to films and say, if my framework, my understanding, my worldview, whatever language you want to use for that, can't stand up to being put in conversation with this film, that probably says as much about my worldview as it does about anything. And so I want to be disrupted. I want those things to be put in tension with each other. But yeah, that doesn't mean that every raunchy film that's made is like some deep opportunity for revelation in the way you see the world. Some things are what they are right on the surface. They're not attempting to be that. And so I think that's where it's not like filmmaker intent is always the most important thing, but sometimes I just think people's critique of film is too shallow and that they come at it for one thing. And I wonder if the filmmaker would say like, well, you're upset that you showed up to my restaurant, but really you needed a gas station, I wasn't trying to give you what you just told me I didn't give you. And so I think we need to be aware of that.
a great and fascinating conversation, and I appreciate having it as a person who's giving work towards creating experiences for people, creating the stories that go into what you call the place where story happens. And you're just saying that you are willing to be disrupted, which is like the other side of the coin of offended. And so how do you know sometimes where, is there a line where, okay, that is now not something that I want to put in my brain and ears, and I'm going to walk out. I think I've walked out of one theater in my entire life, so I'm not very good at that. If I've paid. If they're free, it's another story. This is the kind of this tension that I think families might have. Or sometimes you go to these movies and it's a healthy disruption. It does challenge you. And then sometimes you go to these movies and it just feels like you're being assaulted, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And you start bringing in kids, and now you're talking about making a decision not only for yourself but for your child, and I think everybody needs to think really intentionally about that. Interestingly, we have a rated R policy in our company that we do enforce our rated R, as far as age wise, and especially we don't allow kids under the age of 6 in rated R movies. Period, which sounds probably to some people listening to this podcast like, why would you even have to do that? And it's not because we're trying to legislate morality there. It really is. It's so disruptive to the other people in the theater, not because those kids are running around making sound, but there are some R-rated films where the content is R-rated. It's not being gratuitous. It's just R-rated.
Right.
And if you've got a 4-year-old sitting down the aisle from you, you can't engage with that film at all because you're just just want to reach over and cover that kid's eyes and ears, right? So that's actually how for the overall guest experience, we've actually put some of those things into place. But I've got 4 kids of my own, so this is a real thing. My wife and I talk about it. What do we want to expose them to? And I think it's kid by kid, it's family by family. But I remember I walked out of Natural Born Killers when I was in high school or whenever that thing came out. It was too much for me. I probably would watch it now and it would feel sort of pedestrian after all these years. But at the time, I was in a place where I was like, I'm not ready to, I don't know what this is. This feels dark in a way that I don't want to engage with it. And I walked out. But I also haven't walked out a lot of films because for the most part, I'm hanging in there often because I'm wondering where it's going to go. Are they going to do something with this? There are a lot of films that are 90 minutes of dread for 30 seconds of grace. And that 30 seconds of grace might just be a completely visual thing that happens as the film ends. Now, does that quote unquote justify? Again, that is entirely up to the person sitting in the seat. And I'm open to people feeling all kinds of things about that. But I have found that sitting in the dread is often worth it.
A fascinating person to talk to you are, Eric, about film and cinema. And I want to ask you about a very common moment that comes to all of us, which is like, hey, let's go to a movie. Okay, great. What do you want to see? Now, it could be when you're going off with your wife or your friends or your family, and you've got that decision. Just to be very today, my wife is still, she's out in San Francisco. She's been producing a commercial and she's not home. So I happen to know that tonight is Tuesday night, which is half price night at the theater I can walk to from here. So I've got in my head, if I can just make it tonight, I'm going to go see something tonight. I've decided what. I don't even care. But it's professional development. But the point is, when you're making this decision, I almost always make the wrong decision.
Okay. Tell me about that.
Well, there's movies that I know are probably good. And then there are movies that just sort of look like, I don't know, popcorn. And a lot of times I'm just like, I just feel like seeing, some, Fast and Furious 12 or whatever. Instead of waiting for a Godot, right? You got Fast and Furious 12 and you got waiting for a Godot. Now, I buy the ticket. I sit down and I'm not trying to pick on Fast and Furious. I'm using that as an analogy. And about 10 minutes in, I go, I think I probably am wasting my time. And I don't leave because it's the one that was actually the more quality a piece of literature, work, entertainment that if I really took myself and put it there, it is better. I feel better when it's hard for me to always go see the best choice, is what I'm saying. Do you have that problem? How do you make that decision, what you're going to go see in a night?
Yeah. I live in this privileged space where I can ask for a screener of independent films ahead of time to watch them and see all, so like I have a ridiculous amount of options in front of me, and there are times where I get it. Like I'm just like, there's some art house indie phenom probably sitting there waiting for me. I'm like, I just don't have the gas in the tank for that tonight.
That's right.
I've had people say, like, listen, I don't pay money to have somebody bum me out. Exactly. I don't do that.
I don't go to sad endings.
Yeah.
It's my mom.
Yeah. And I get that. If you want movies to be just an upper and just sort of a visceral ride, yeah, Hobbs and Shaw, The Fast and Furious, whatever, like that's a pretty good choice. And so I have this theory that movies are like pizza. I love pizza. I love pizza up and down the ladder, right? I like frozen pizzas. I don't throw stones at a delivery pizza, major chain delivery pizza. I love really good wood-fired, artisan-style pizzas. I really like them all. But you can't really compare a Tony's frozen pizza to, my favorite in my part of town is Andrea's Pizza on Boston. It's this amazing thin crust kind of New York style pizza or whatever. They're the same thing, but they're not at all the same thing. But if you approach a frozen pizza, you're like, hey, it's a frozen pizza. That to me, that's what Fast and Furious is. It's a frozen pizza. Who cares? Eat it. If it tastes good, eat it.
Well, I believe we've just discovered the name of the podcast. Movies are like pizza. I always struggle to know what to name these things, but you've given it to me. So this is an irony of the film business. If I go into a concert and I want to see, let's just say Pink Floyd or something, I'm going to spend the money to see Pink Floyd, and they're going to command the money. They're going to come in with 12 trucks and 1,000, And if I want to see, the cookie cutters who are from the local, and I'll pay the difference of the different level of quality. Films come into your theaters that cost $100 million, $200 million to produce, and you charge whatever you charge, $10, $11, $12 to see the film. And then right next door might be a little independent film that cost $1.4 million to produce, and you charge $10, $11, $12 to produce. The disparity between the entertainment value on the production side is just, I think, like nothing else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a good point. But again, I think if you shift your thinking a little bit, I mean, the great thing about the independent film is that it doesn't have the budget to get lost in car chases and things exploding and all of that stuff. An independent film, especially when you're dealing with younger filmmakers because they're just kind of getting their start, you get these it's why there's a lot of coming of age stories being made by, people in their first film or two. It's because that's all the content they've got, right? It's easy to tell human stories because all you need are humans, and they're less expensive often than blowing up a skyscraper. So I was just listening to a podcast as I drove out here, and it was talking about Terminator, and there was is this thing any good? I mean, the new Terminator movie, is it good? No, it's not good. It's nobody was looking for that whatever it's sequel that is. It's just it's not a great movie. It's fine. There are a couple lines. The special effects are stunning, and if you go all the way back to the beginning, the first Terminator and especially Terminator 2, where they were just, I mean, what they were doing with special effects in that movie it was unprecedented. So in that moment, the special effects really served the story. Now they're trying to keep up with themselves and be like, man, we better have great special effects. They spent a boatload on that, I'm sure. The rest of the movie is just like, who cares? Immediately that movie starts in a chase. It's basically a chase scene. It's an hour and a half, 2 hour long chase scene. It starts in a chase scene. And I was 5 minutes into this movie, and I leaned over to the person sitting next to me who I was with, and I just said, I don't care if any of them die. You just don't. You're not invested, right? And so that's a very different thing. So that budget doesn't equal quality in for sure. Now there have been films that have parlayed these massive things, and I actually give Disney, Marvel a lot of credit. They are, I think, continuing to push themselves to try and really tell compelling stories. Some of them may be better than others, but the Avengers movies could be terrible. They could just be special effects. And there's, they're gnawing on the sets for plenty of time for sure. But, there's actually some character development going on there. People are invested in those characters. There's some thoughtfulness going on there. And so, yeah, they're trying to do something with that. But, you can watch the box office gross. If there's huge special effects and nothing else, that movie is not sticking around. In Terminator, it was, T whatever this is here, it was almost dead on arrival. People don't care. But then you get a film like, even a little bit more of a mid-sized budget film, that's about to come out. Won't You Be My Neighbor? Those kinds of films where, Tom Hanks spent a lot of money on Tom Hanks, I'm sure, but still, that's a relatively simple movie to make.
The pursuit of quality is one of those great discussions and books and written but I will just go out on a limb and say quality is what I look for, and story and filmmaking and crafting. And if something is mailed in or is cliched from start to finish, the genre isn't as important as the quality. And I feel that way. In for example, in music. I mean, I'd rather hear great music of whatever than bad music of a genre that I might be more naturally attentive to. In the kind of Christian film world where I kind of sometimes live, so I'm often wondering if I'm allowed to talk about that. I mean, I was interviewing a guy just a couple of days ago, a comedian, Michael Joyner, an actor, doing a podcast like this, and for some reason halfway in the movie I said, a film I just saw that I just loved was Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Yeah. And he jumps back and says he just loved it too. So we started, and then I said, I wonder if I'm, going to get in trouble for talking on this podcast about a Quentin Tarantino, because he tends to get a little violent. I don't know if you've noticed that in his films.
I have, yes. So, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was number 1 or number 2 for me this year.
Oh, well, see, so I've watched it twice now, and look, I can learn from the filmmaking that was done there in every aspect. The sound design, the pacing, the cutting, the editing. You got great actors at the peak of their powers. And then you do get skull-crushing sounds in the back. But still...
For Tarantino, it's very restrained.
It was the... Yeah. And a lot of people that I've talked to have said, I didn't want to even go see it. He's kind of lost me.
Sure.
But I went and saw it late. I wasn't the first one in line. I wasn't the first. I went and saw it late with my wife. And he got me back. Yeah. It's the best one he's ever done, in my opinion.
Yeah. So I'm in a similar boat with you. If people ask me what my favorite movies are, Pulp Fiction was a big deal to me when I graduated from high school. It basically came out as I was graduating from high school. And that's another one where it's a great example. I mean, there are plenty of things in that movie that most people would point to and say, well, that's trash. You shouldn't engage with that at all. Fine. I understand what you're saying. But for a high school senior kid who, spent 4 years feeling a little bit unsure and angsty and hurt and confused about who he was and who he was becoming, this idea of walking, these gangsters who were, quoting scripture before they blew people's heads off. Like there was something about this, the irreverence of the combination of things that felt like, yeah, this actually makes sense to me. The wandering and wondering that happens in that movie was just really impactful to me. So he had me there. So that still will always be my first love with Tarantino. I liked Jackie Brown a ton because, again, of the filmmaking in it. You get into some of the other stuff. I liked, I thought he did a great job on a lot of those films. But Once Upon a Time in Hollywood comes in, and the performances are just off the charts. I mean,
Yep.
Brad Pitt in that movie.
Yep.
I mean, I just if he doesn't get the supporting role for that, then why are we even giving out awards?
And I mean, we're going off on this tangent. Maybe you've seen this film if you're listening to this podcast or not, but he's made me want to be that kind of friend.
Yeah,
I try.
Yeah, right.
And I think, it's the Samwise Ganges to the Frodo Baggins. The real hero of the story is often not kind of the lead character, but the faithful, loyal friend and so he plays that kind of a friend in this movie, and you're right. He's as cool as it gets. That's
so good.
It's John Wayne when he was John Wayne. That's Clint Eastwood when he was Clint Eastwood.
Yeah.
That's just the cool leading man. In this case, playing the supporting role.
Yep.
Great film. And then other ones that they've put all the money into it. It's I'm going to pick on the Pirates of the Caribbean sequence.
Yeah, right.
I keep falling asleep. I literally fell asleep, and every time I tried to go see those theaters, they just didn't get to me for some reason. I just couldn't stay awake.
Yeah, no, the most recent one of those was just not great. And again, you could just see like there were just these set pieces that they were doing, and those there's not enough story there, and so you have to have both. And you don't have to have a car chase and explosions and all of those things in your movies to have a great movie. That will never be enough. But you can, but it doesn't mean that equals a bad movie. And, so it's just, what are you going to do with that budget? How is it going to serve the telling of the story? And yeah, there can be spectacle and all of that stuff, and that's fun. I mean, you think back to those early Superman movies with Christopher Reeves, like the wonder, that was created by...
You will believe a man can fly.
Yeah,
and that was a
right.
big thing back
then. It was. And that was fun. And so that was special effects really, doing something. And yeah, I mean, the wonder that I felt as a kid watching those movies was great. And I'm sure at the time that cost a ton to figure out how to do.
Well, you've kind of intimidated me, Eric, I must say. I think you'd be a tough person for me to keep in my mind as I go about making. I've got a chance to direct another film now and write it, and it's a sequel to this film that we did called Tortured for Christ, which showed at your theater, and I did a Q&A at your theater. I've had 2 movies that I've got to open in your theaters over the years, and in both times, I must say thank you to Ron Van Timmeren, to the whole team at Celebration North. It's just really, really wonderful to have local theaters. You guys also, I don't know if you know this, but you've also let us bring films in at 9 in the morning and test them out in your sound room, because as good as our sound room is down here, it doesn't quite simulate the size and the openness of where the low end goes. And you guys have been just great partners for us as filmmakers, and I appreciate it. And I want to thank you for being a creative officer who's keeping movies alive. And I love your phrase, a place where story happens, because I think community is important. I mean, I think community is important at church. I think it's also sort of important at the football game. There's something about getting us out of our caves, and I want to make films that are shown on big screens with good-sized crowds and fantastic sound systems, and anything short of that makes me a little bit frustrated. Because that's how it's intended. I want to think about that screen size when we frame shots so that we're not in the nostrils and the eyeballs all the time, because everyone's going to watch it on their iPhone. And maybe I'm a dinosaur, but I appreciate you because you're keeping the theaters alive, and you've seen. It sounds like you've seen everything. You've seen everything.
I get to see some stuff. I don't get to see everything. There's just not the time in the day, and there's not the desire there either. I mean, back to that part of the conversation. There's just some stuff that I'm like, that is not, if we have a finite amount of time, I'm not putting 2 hours into that bucket. But yeah, no, I appreciate that, and it's something we really do care about is helping people get their dreams on the screen, and as much as I appreciate the distribution that is possible because of streaming and all of that stuff. It really does get movies and content to audiences that wouldn't otherwise get to have it. But there aren't very many filmmakers, that I think are like, man, when I grow up, I just want to make I just want to make a movie for people's phones, you know?
Right.
Now, at the same time, my son's running around shooting stuff on his phone and, you know, uploading it to YouTube, and there is something there. So it'll be interesting to watch how that continues to evolve. But that's still what happens with your earbuds and you is a very different thing than what happens when the lights come up and there's a lot of tear-stained faces, or there's, you know, a lot of sore guts from laughing and all that stuff. That's an experience that just can't really be replaced.
Well, if you're listening to this No Shame podcast, wherever you live, if there's a theater near you. And this discussion with Eric has been really fun for me. It's a topic that you've enlightened some things. And, you know, I would love to sort of say there's the right choice and for you. And maybe it's not the choice that is going to, like you said, just you'll see yourself on the screen and it'll just affirm everything you've already thought. Maybe it is good to go see a film that kind of challenges or disrupts us. At the same time, I believe that there is poison out there, and I don't always know when I'm drinking poison. And I also urge my family and to be cautious when we put stuff, because the power of that communication is so pervasive. You really, your guard is down. So I just hope and pray you make good choices going to theaters. But man, I hope that we get to show the best movies in the best theaters with the best sound systems and the biggest screens, because it's an amazing impact. And it's not dead yet, thanks to theaters like yours at Studio C. And I thank you for being on the podcast today and chatting movies with us.
Hey, thanks for having me. It was a ton of fun.
Have no shame, no, we are not afraid. No shame of the gospel of His name. It's the power of God by which we all are saved. We need not be afraid.
No Shame is a weekly podcast where John Groders discusses life at the intersection of faith and culture with all kinds of interesting and inspiring guests. Subscribe to the podcast today by going to johngroders.com, select the podcast tab, and hit subscribe. Listen whenever you have time, but don't miss any of these life-giving conversations.